The danger to shipping in the Persian Gulf grows, and on Wall Street, the bulls run rampant.
NBC Nightly News with Tom Brokaw.
Good evening, I'm Garrick Utley. Tom Brokaw is on assignment. Mines, they are simple, they are cheap, weapons from another era. But today it became clear that they are becoming an even bigger threat to shipping in the Persian Gulf than had been believed. A convoy of 3 Kuwaiti tankers flying American flags and escorted by U.S. Navy ships arrived safely in Kuwait today, but the voyage was delayed because of the fear of mines. And also today, 5 mines were found in the Gulf of Oman just outside the entrance to the Persian Gulf. Our correspondent, Martin Fletcher, found one of them.
This Second World War type mine has widened the Iran-Iraq war, extended the battle zone out of the Persian Gulf and into the previously peaceful sea lanes of the Gulf of Oman. After NBC News reported our sighting of the mine this morning to the Omani Navy, they sent boats and planes to search their waters and found 4 more. We couldn't raise the captain of a Greek tanker just 200 yards from the mine, so we landed our helicopter on his ship to warn him. He told us he'd seen something yesterday and reported it, but didn't know it was a mine, and nobody had come to check.
Well, I can tell you that is a mine.
Yes, I must to give him the anchor to change the anchor, to change the position of my ship now. I must inform also my brother there to the other ship to change immediately anchorage because so this area should be dangerous for me now.
The mine had been in the same position for at least a day. It's a fixed mine moored to the seabed some 300 feet down. So out goes the theory that it was an accident when the Texaco Caribbean hit a mine Monday, ripping a hole in its hull.
This is clearly an attempt by someone, presumably Iran or Iraq, to warn the Gulf states and the superpowers that if this war goes on, it could get much bigger.
The Soviet Navy has a destroyer and minesweepers only a few miles from the mine we spotted. British, American and French warships regularly pass by escorting their own tankers. Day by day, the chance of a major escalation in the Gulf War is growing. A military source in the Gulf told us the most likely culprit for the mines is Iran, which 4 days ago finished naval exercises only 30 miles away. But late this evening, the Speaker of the Iranian Parliament, Hashemi Rafsanjani, denied Iran planted the mines. While touring an ammunition dump, he insisted it was in Iran's interest to keep the sea lanes safe for all shipping. He said the Iranian Navy is sending ships to pick up the mines, then they'll be checked in labs to prove they're not Iranian. Whoever laid the mines, the war is getting closer to the Gulf states, who've tried so long and so hard not to be dragged into the Iran-Iraq war. Martin Fletcher, NBC News in the Gulf.
Mines, of course, threaten shipping of all nations, and today Great Britain changed its mind and said it will send 4 minesweepers to the Gulf. France said it will send 2 minesweepers, and the Dutch also are expected to send help. Fred Francis has information on the extent to which the United States is now relying on its allies and friends to clear the mines.
NBC News has learned from administration officials that Saudi Arabia and Kuwait secretly cleared a half-a-dozen mines placed in the path of a 3-tanker convoy, which was escorted this morning by U.S. warships into Kuwait. A U.S. official told NBC News that the American task force sailed behind a Saudi minesweeper and a Kuwaiti tugboat loaded with American sonar. The official said while waiting for these British minesweepers and 2 from the French, the U.S. will not have to dodge mines because of the Arab help. But the official added, "We're damn glad the European allies had a change of heart." Though the British made it clear they were not sending the minesweepers to bolster American policy or confront Iran.
All we are intending to do with this capability is sweep mines away from the high seas, which could be a danger not only to our own shipping, but to peaceful shipping generally. I think any suggestion that that is aggressive or provocative or escalatory has no chance of being believed by anyone.
Meanwhile, the Guadalcanal, carrying 8 anti-mine helicopters, has broken down at the Indian Ocean island of Diego Garcia, more than 2,000 miles away. One official said electrical problems will delay the Guadalcanal another 4 or 5 days. By month's end, more than 50 warships will be focused on the Persian Gulf. all caught up in American policy, which many strategists say is flawed, primarily because Gulf tensions cause higher world oil prices. That means more money for Iran to continue its war.
Ironically, the outcome of the entire initiative might be to double the funds available to the Iranians to pursue the war against Iraq.
If the administration has a clearer view of the policy, it's not explaining it, nor are officials acknowledging that U.S. fighters fired missiles at the Iranians this weekend, and no one will talk about the number of U.S. forces now in the Gulf. One military officer said it's the kind of secrecy and double talk associated with the Grenada invasion. Fred Francis, NBC News, the Pentagon.
But Iran is much bigger and further away from the United States than Grenada. American options in the Persian Gulf are limited. One possibility is to try to isolate Iran more than it is. But even if the United States and its allies could do that, and it's a big if, would it have any effect on Iran? Henry Champ is currently the only Western correspondent in Tehran, and he offers this assessment.
Iran, full liquor bottles are displayed at the Kuwaiti embassy. They were found when crowds ransacked the place following the Meccan incident, and they are proof of evil. At the Saudi embassy, guards lounge about out, but at least the Saudi diplomats were freed. Police at the French embassy hold diplomats there hostage until an Iranian wanted in connection with terrorist activities in France is released. A ministry official here called the French spies.
The Iranian government says that these are not, they are spies.
So these French people are spies?
Yeah.
The British are down to a single man following an incident where one of their diplomats was beaten. The Canadians have left, and the American embassy is a school for Revolutionary Guards. Many countries have arms boycotts aimed at Iran. Others have dismissed Iranian diplomats on grounds they were contributing to terrorism. The frustrating thing about all of this to other countries is there doesn't seem to be anyone in Tehran who cares about boycotts, about isolation, about anything that other governments do. The protests that matter to the religious leaders are in the streets of Tehran. Anti-American most days, but other countries do receive their share. Ayatollah Khomeini goes his own way, and so far it has worked. Despite boycotts, arms from many nations, including the United States, are in his arsenal. The West tried to cut their reliance on his oil, and Iran still makes billions, enough to wage war against Iraq, tie up American warships in the Gulf, and run his country well enough. There are few visible complainers. The markets are full, plenty of Western goods, even though the prices are high. 8 years of revolution, 7 at war with Iraq, and large parts of the world angry with Iran. But there's no sign here anyone cares. Henry Champ, NBC News, Tehran.
And there was no sign on Wall Street today that investors, big or small, were worried about what the Gulf conflict may mean for the economy. We'll have that report in a moment. And this evening, we will meet Finus Mitchell and learn why in his 85 years he has climbed 279 mountain peaks and isn't finished yet. It was more of the same on Wall Street today. The Dow Jones jumped more than 44 points, the 7th biggest one-day gain. It closed at 2680, a record, and the volume, 278 million, made it the 2nd biggest trading day. An unprecedented climb, which, as NBC's financial correspondent Mike Jensen reports now, has been underway 5 full years.
Today, the action was in the trading rooms of Wall Street. But the stock market boom of the past 5 years has been felt all over America. It has spawned a corporate takeover frenzy and profited from it. It has created $1.8 trillion in new wealth, and it has fostered a sense of financial well-being. Starting on August 13th, 1982, when the Dow stood at 776.92, the stock market has had an astonishing rise. Total shares more than tripling in value, breaking through the 2,600 mark this week.
Experts say the bull market is a result of 3 things: growing corporate profits, which make stocks worth more, declining interest rates, which make other types of investments worth less, like certificates of deposit, and finally the fact that 5 years ago the stock market stood at an unrealistically low level.
More money has been made by more people in this bull market than ever before. There have been more participants in it, either directly through profit-sharing funds, employee benefit plans, or mutual funds, or directly by owning stocks than ever before.
The benefits, however, have not been uniform. Program trading, using computerized formulas to decide when to buy and sell, has made millions for some, while others have been laid off as a result of the corporate takeovers and cutbacks that helped boost stock prices. Crooks on Wall Street, like Ivan Boesky and other inside traders, made millions illegally. But through it all, the stock market continued to rise.
Despite all that, the market and the investing public, both professional and individual, have ignored all that because I think they perceived, and correctly so, that the profits to be made out there were so great.
Most analysts say at some point the market will drop, perhaps 250 or 300 points on the Dow. But then they say the bull market is likely to continue.
Things are not going to be as good in the future as they have been in the past, but this bull cycle is probably not yet over. There are still opportunities to make money in it. My feeling is you have between 6 months and a year more.
One thing to remember amidst all the euphoria. Over the years, much of the increase in the stock market has come from inflation. Adjusted for inflation, the Dow would have to go up another 800 points to get back to its levels of 20 years ago. Mike Jensen, NBC News, New York. New York.
Alan Greenspan was sworn in today as the new chairman of the Federal Reserve Board. He took the oath from Vice President Bush in the White House East Room as a cousin looked on. Greenspan then heard President Reagan call him an economist and urged him to continue the low inflation and the high growth policies of his predecessor, Paul Volcker. A judge for the Federal Communications Commission ruled today that RKO is not fit to continue as a broadcaster. He refused to renew licenses for 14 RKO radio and television stations worth $1 billion. The judge said no company had ever been as dishonest as RKO in its dealings with the commission. RKO now has the option of appealing the decision. Defense Secretary Caspar Weinberger raised questions today about the Central American peace plan proposed by 5 Central American presidents. Weinberger said lack of deadlines for democratic reforms and the removal of Soviet bloc advisors from Nicaragua gave him problems. But as White House correspondent Andrea Mitchell reports now, Weinberger is not the only critic of that effort or of the president's plan to end the war in Nicaragua.
Many Contra supporters are afraid that the rebel forces are being sold out, not by liberals, but by Ronald Reagan. Prominent conservatives are organizing to oppose both the administration's peace plan and the plan negotiated by Central American leaders. Referring to President Kennedy's disastrous invasion of Cuba, today's editorial in the Wall Street Journal proclaimed the plan Reagan's Bay of Pigs, appeasement, and a fiasco.
The Bay of Pigs has a great analogy where we encouraged people to get in there and fight, and then when they needed us the most, we weren't there.
The editorial cartoon in today's Washington Times, a conservative newspaper, suggested that Rambo Reagan has gone soft. The paper also quoted former UN Ambassador Jeane Kirkpatrick, saying that the plan was adopted very hastily. And for the first time, critics of the president's policy include the vice president, speaking on Miami radio station WINZ.
We're taking on faith too much of what the communist leader, Daniel Ortega, wanted.
Inside the cabinet, Defense Secretary Weinberger is said to have doubts about whether a ceasefire can work. And Republican presidential hopeful Jack Kemp infuriated the White House by calling El Salvador's President Duarte, urging him to reject the Reagan plan.
To delay the request by the president for the freedom fighters until September, October, November, or who knows when, at the request of Daniel Ortega, who is no friend of freedom and democracy in Nicaragua, I think is to let the freedom fighter cause wilt on the vine.
Conservatives who are running a television campaign for the Contras are especially bitter because they had hoped to capitalize on any increased public support created by Oliver North's testimony at the Iran-Contra hearings.
But now, liberal sympathizers of the Sandinista communists are determined to abandon these freedom fighters.
White House officials believe that before proposing the peace plan, they did not have the votes to win military aid for the Contras. But if the plan fails, they think Contra aid might pass. because the president could say that he had at least tried to find a diplomatic solution. Andrea Mitchell, NBC News at the White House.
In South Korea, labor trouble today. 190 companies shut down, including the big automaker Hyundai. Workers want more pay and better working conditions, and they used violence to back up their demands. The government, backed by the military, threatened to use force to stop it. Stock market booming, but fears of inflation, even a recession. This can be a confusing time to predict the future of the economy, of our standard of living. It's a demanding time for the person who holds what may be the second most important job in government, the head of the Federal Reserve System. As we reported, that job changed hands today, and that's the subject of John Chancellor's commentary. John?
Garrick, it's been a big year for bad guys in Washington, so let's hear it for a pair of good guys, Paul Volcker and Alan Greenspan. After 8 heroic and underpaid years, Paul Volcker is leaving government, and Alan Greenspan has replaced him as chairman of the Federal Reserve Board. When Paul Volcker went to the Fed in 1979, inflation was out of control. That year, the Consumer Price Index shot up more than 13%, killer inflation. In 1986, inflation was about 1%. That's the story. Volcker's high interest rates did the job, but he took an awful beating from Congress and the business community while doing it. His replacement has good credentials and a reputation for independence. Let me tell you a story about Alan Greenspan. When he was President Ford's economic advisor, he argued for high interest rates to fight inflation. That policy may have helped cause the recession of 1975. The recession was one reason the Republicans lost the White House in '76, and some Republicans still blame Greenspan. But their criticism is really a compliment to his tenacity as an inflation fighter. Now, today, the inflation rate is going up again. If the second half of this year is as bad as the first, the country will be in trouble. Some Republicans will still be after Greenspan to ignore inflation and pep up the economy for next year's presidential election. But Greenspan is not likely to give in to those pressures. The Fed lost a good man today, but it got another in his place, which is a piece of good news. And that's commentary for this evening, Garrett.
Thank you, John. Researchers disclosed today that an experimental AIDS vaccine will soon be tested on humans for the first time in the United States. 6 major medical centers are involved. The researchers caution, however, that the first test will be to study the side effects of the drug, not to see whether it will protect against AIDS. But there is hope a full vaccine will be ready in the 1990s. Clara Peller, the one-time star of Wendy's hamburger commercials, died today. Mrs. Peller became a celebrity when she asked the most famous question of 1984.
Where's the beef?
Some hamburger places give you a lot less beef on a lot of bun.
Where's the beef?
Presidential candidate Walter Mondale used the question with devastating effect.
When I hear your new ideas, I'm reminded of that ad. Where's the beef? Yeah.
Mrs. Peller died at her home in Chicago, Illinois. She was believed to be 85. And finally this evening, the story of a man who likes to walk up a mountain. He has hiked 18,000 miles, climbed 279 peaks, stocked 314 virgin lakes with millions of trout. And he has done all of this in only 85 years. Finus Mitchell is his name, and Bob Dotson tells us why he never stops.
Finus Mitchell is nearly as old as this century, but he still wanders Wyoming's highest mountains alone. He has climbed 279 peaks, so many summits so often, the U.S. Geological Survey sends him its maps to correct from memory. No one knows Wyoming's Wind River Range better.
This is home to me and always will be.
He has hiked 8